I want to tell you about an amazing American botany professor called Robin Wall Kimmerer. And when she takes her students out on fieldwork expeditions, she encourages them to listen to the plants, to listen to the teachings of the plants. Besides being a world expert on mosses, Kimmerer is steeped in the spiritual knowledge of the indigenous Potawatomi people. And this makes her think in a really interesting way about her work as a scientist. Rather than seeing herself as some kind of all-powerful investigator who examines these inert specimens, she thinks about what the plants have got to say to her. She thinks of humans and plants alike as lively beings who are bound together in a single community. Now, you can find something a little bit like Kimmerer's take on plants, her spiritual take on science, in the Bible. If we look in the book of Job, that extraordinary section where Job is trying to deal with the absolute misery of his life by being confronted by the awe and the inexplicability of the natural world. And we find the line, "Ask the plants of the earth, and they will teach you." But despite the fact that we have got that kind of wisdom within the Bible, it would be fair to say that perhaps more recently, Christian traditions have not been so good at listening to the plants, listening to our fellow members of the created world. But we can find examples of that within the Christian tradition. And to give you one of those, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Celtic tradition as an example of Christianity that's been taught by plants. Now, whenever we talk about Celtic Christianity, we kind of first have to give a footnote which acknowledges that academics are kind of quite skeptical about the notion that there is such a thing even as Celtic Christianity. I don't think we actually need to worry too much about that, because what they are doubting or questioning is the sense that there is a single cohesive, organised form of Christianity in the, something like the Catholic Church, except existing in this sort of far Western European world. I'm not a specialist on that. I will take that from them, that it's not a single church, a single recognisable church. But that's not the point. The point is when you drill down into the details of the theology and the practice and the spirituality of people who were in these places, then we find great wisdom. And we don't need to worry about whether it's a cohesive whole or not. So if we look beyond the western edges of the Roman Church in modern-day Ireland, Scotland and Wales, we find early medieval monks who were absolutely steeped in the love and study of nature. They often prayed and worshipped outdoors, for example, amongst the green leaves. When monks established monasteries in Ireland, they often thought first about the trees. It was important for the monks to choose places for their holy settlements where the woods, and especially oaks, remained. So deep was the monk St. Columcilla's feeling for oaks that, according to one story, he built his church facing the wrong way rather than cutting down a group of oak trees. Later in his life, Columcilla travelled to Scotland, and there he acquired the name by which we more usually know him in the English-speaking world, which is St. Columba. And there's tantalising evidence about the gardens that were built within these communities and what the plants taught the monks who lived and worked there. So one example to tell you about is something that you will know today, St. John's wort. You've probably heard of that as a supplement that you can buy in health food shops. I wonder whether it's something that you can actually recognise growing in the wild. It's well known in traditional medicine. It's sold as a cure for mild depression. It's got its historical roots with Columba and Celtic Christianity. It's got a name in Irish Gaelic, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, but it's from the words embrace, Columcilla and church, so it's a beautiful name. In Scotland, It's got Scots Gaelic names that translate as the jewel of Columba, or my personal favourite, the armpit package of Columba. And the idea was that you would sort of mulch it up and strap it under your armpit. The reason why it's called St John's wort is, in fact, because of Columba. St John the Baptist was Columba's favourite saint by all accounts, and so he gifted that name to one of the plants that was very dear to him. So within its place in the Celtic Christian community, St John's wort, if you like, spoke to humans to restore them to their proper place within creation. We'll probably never know what specific research Columba and his monks did to learn from the many herbs in their gardens and growing in the fields and woods. But we do have evidence from the native names of plants that the Celts named plants from their uses, their appearance, their habitats, and their traditional and religious associations. They had this really integrated knowledge of the natural world. Their names sprang from deep acquaintance with the leafy world. We also know from early books and manuscripts about plants and herbs that monks elsewhere in Europe made a deep study of green and growing things. Like the Celtic Christians, European monks drew on pre-Christian knowledge about plants, traditional knowledge, but they didn't always treat their ancestors respectfully. Traditional ways of knowing, which look something a little bit like Kimmerer's 21st century methods, were sometimes labelled as witchcraft. The forests of Columbkilla's homeland were systematically cut down by the English in Tudor times. Their immediate aim was to get material for shipbuilding, but so far as the colonists were concerned, it did no harm that the Irish would also be culturally and spiritually uprooted along with their trees. And that, unfortunately, is the story that then came to characterise the next few hundred years from the early modern times up to where we are now. Over the coming centuries in Europe, into the era of modernity, plants were reduced to resources and to data. And you can think of this as a kind of a left hand and a right hand thing. On the left hand, extraction, exploitation that has continued onto the present day. And on the right hand, science as a way of thinking about the world that kind of justifies or makes easy that instrumentalization of the natural world, reducing it to stuff. Science was the development of a practice that saw nature as something external to the observer. So rather than loving nature and being part of it, the observer is kind of like a disembodied mind, studying but disconnected from the rest of the world. And I think to a degree theology has also followed in that model of scholarship that modern science created, a disembodied mode of knowledge that claims some kind of objective mental grasp upon the world, but neglecting to talk about how we actually participate within it. In this growth of modernity, we lost our sense of kinship with the created world, that kinship that was so present for St. Columba. And with that loss of meaning has come a catastrophic uprooting from our place in the world. We're reduced to the notion that nature is somehow out there, something optional that we can visit on a Sunday afternoon for a nice walk, but otherwise we can take it or leave it. And now we're just beginning to realise with this awful, awful mounting horror that we're not just spiritually and culturally uprooted from the world by this, we're uprooted actually even from our viability within the world. You know, like a plant that's uprooted, we actually cannot live. We can see resources running out, nature running away from us in ways that we can't control. We are unable to solve our planetary crisis scientifically. We've had decades where we've known what to do and we're just not doing it. Only a reawakening of our spirituality will do it. We need to encounter afresh the depth of our dependence on God and our helplessness to redeem the world for ourselves. This planetary crisis is just a side effect of a deeper theological malaise. There are a few just tantalising glimpses of Christianity listening to the teachings of plants, even in this era of modernity. And the one I want to talk to you about today is another monk, Gregor Mendel, who lived through the 19th century pretty much. In the garden of St. Thomas's Abbey in Brno, Mendel experimented, you may know about this, with yellow and green peas to show that colour was governed by two factors working together. And he showed that greenness was dominant over the recessive yellow factor. And he found that other factors, today we call them genes, work the same way to govern different aspects of the plant's appearance. Now, some decades later, the statistician Ronald Fisher found that Mendel's results of breeding, crossbreeding, and counting how many of each variety that he had were too good to be true, as though a person had repeatedly tossed a coin 10 times and got exactly 5 heads in every single trial. Just that cannot be true. And there's been various explanations given to account for his results, such as, for example, that he deliberately misreported the facts. But maybe, just maybe, we can place Mendel in that longer tradition of monastic study. Perhaps on some level he knew what the plants were trying to say to him and adjusted his human methods to best capture their truths. Well, excitingly, there are signs of scholarship changing in more widespread ways to be in touch with the body and with the interdependence of creation, not standing apart from it either scientifically or theologically. And of course, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, with whom we began this lecture, is an example. And I really commend to you her writings on moss. They're so beautiful and they're so full of wisdom. She talks about how they're different from plants because they don't have the tough fibre that makes your precious daffodils snap in the wind, which immediately kind of makes you start thinking about those beautiful lines that Jesus quotes from Isaiah about a reed that will not break. They've got thin cell layers. They're completely open to water. They're completely open to the environment. They don't have the kind of waxy protective layers that plants do. What is in the environment flows into them and flows out of them. They're kind of completely incarnated plants, if you like. And when they undergo tough conditions, they shut down, they look brown, they crisp up, but they can resurrect when the times are right again. So there's just so much that you can get from listening to the mosses if you kind of have Kimmerer as your guide. I know that in some circles, the idea of listening to mosses makes some Christians very anxious. People start bandying around words like pantheism. Are we saying that everything is God in the world? And the more I think about this, the less I worry about it, because I listen to other people all the time. I get wisdom and insight and input from other people, but I don't think other people are God. I know that those are created by God to be part of my community and to guide me along the way. And for me, I think the same attitude can carry us through thinking about other aspects of the created world. So Columba, Mendel and Kimmerer are some of our human guides on this story, a story of faith that is informed by the teachings of plants. And I'm so excited about this MA programme because it will, I believe, develop a deep wisdom like theirs that comes of what was previously known as science and theology, but I think is better thought of as an integrated form of learning and spirituality. It will position students, all of us, not to stand outside of nature, but to be fully alive and God-purposed within the creative order. Thank you.